Hey, everybody. So today we have a very special guest with us, which is Alan. Alan, thank you so much for joining us today. And
Thank
can you
you.
please introduce yourself just for all our listeners?
Sure. So I'm Alan, and I'm from Grapevine, Texas, and had a custody case going on for the majority of the last 8 years. So I can describe that if you'd like.
Yeah, sure.
All right. So back in 2017, my daughter's mom took my daughter, and moved 500 miles away. And then I spent about 7 months in court trying to get any visitation at all, just temporary orders. And then on February 11th, 2017, or shortly after, I got a call from a friend saying that my daughter was left in the car at a bar, and that there were several news reports that were circulating about the story. And so I called CPS, asked if I could come pick up my daughter. They said no, there's already a safety plan signed, and um, basically she had gone on a date with a child counselor, and the child counselor was the CEO of children's home for abused and neglected children. So, he was counseling abused and neglected children, and they got arrested for child endangerment and abandonment. I had an emergency hearing in Fort Worth, and the judge in Fort Worth said that my daughter was in grave danger, but he was going to place the child with the mother. And he said that jurisdiction wasn't proper in Tarrant County, even though it was. The reason why it was is because I filed a suit within 6 months. And on top of that, she didn't dispute jurisdiction within 21 days. So he told me jurisdiction wasn't proper, and but it was. So I ended up filing another case in Hidalgo County, which is on the Texas-Mexico border, and had another second emergency hearing regarding child endangerment and abandonment. And the judge here said that I need to start paying the mom child support, and she needed to supervise my visits because she had kept the child away from me for 7 or 8 months.
Wait, hold on a second. So just to be clear, you're saying that during a hearing on emergency custody regarding allegations of abuse and child abuse and neglect, you had a judge enter child support orders and put you on supervised visits?
Yeah, so she basically had to supervise me to get me reacquainted with my daughter because I'd spent so long in court trying to get any visitation whatsoever. And so rather than protecting the child, the judge ordered that I pay the child abuser child support.
And when you said that, your child was left in the car, was your ex arrested?
Yeah, she was arrested. There was a good Samaritan who was walking by the car. They had parked in the far end of the bar parking lot, and cracked all four windows down by about an inch or two. And this good Samaritan, he works at a car dealership, and his best friend's car door was dented really bad earlier that day, which is why he parked so far out. And then when he started walking to the bar, he heard a kid crying, baby crying, and he took a few steps and he was like, "No, I didn't hear a baby crying." He took a few more steps. He's like, "Yeah, I definitely heard a baby crying." So his friends were pulling up at the bar at the same time. They pulled the windows back, unlocked the door, got my daughter out, told the bouncer at the front door who was charging entry fee to the bar that night for like a UFC fight, and then like 7 or 8 cop cars pulled up. She was laughing as she was getting arrested, according to his testimony. Um, and she was saying, "Give me my child back." Just a big mess. And crazy thing is that 3 years earlier, that same Good Samaritan found another child in the car at the same bar,
Wow.
and went into the bar and got up to like the DJ station or whatever, and said, come get your child." And so the second time it happened at the same bar, he was just like, "I'm not going to let that slide again."
So when the arrest happened, where did your daughter go?
So she went with her great grandmother's nurse for
Her
one
great
night.
grandmother's nurse. So did the police determine at the scene that they were going to find a family member that she could immediately go with?
Well, they called CPS, and the mom didn't give CPS my phone number or my address. So at this point, since she didn't give the CPS my phone number or my address, they basically had to decide between a child removal or reunification or whatever you want to call it. And they ended up deciding we're going to give the child back to the mom when she gets out of jail the next morning.
Wow.
So a
Did,
little
did they
bit
did
more
they
on
make
that.
I'm sorry, did they make any attempts to locate you or find out who you were? And was your name on the birth certificate or any other records?
They looked me up on white pages and ended up calling my dad's phone number somehow. They didn't leave a message at my dad's house. But if you just Google search my name, I'm a realtor. So you can find my phone number on like the first 10 pages of Google.
And they didn't even bother to try.
They didn't try a Google search, they didn't try a Facebook search or a LinkedIn search or any of that. They didn't look up property records to see the address of my house.
And were you on her
Uh,
birth certificate at the time?
no, there was some confusion initially whether or not I was the father, and so my thought process behind that was kind of like it would be easier to get on the birth certificate, um, a month or two down the road than to get off the birth certificate. In Texas, um, if if two parents are married and a woman has a child that isn't the husband's, the child is automatically considered the husband's, and after 4 years, a husband can't dispute paternity. So after 4 years, a husband is stuck with another man's child legally pretty much forever, or at least until the child turns 18.
And was it challenging to try to get your name on the certificate after the fact?
Not really. Well, I guess maybe technically I'm not on the birth certificate, but I have rights, and so rights is what's important to me more than my name being on a piece of paper.
And you were able to establish that by going to court and establishing paternity through the court, right?
Yeah, but and another thing that first judge in Fort Worth, who said that my daughter was in danger, jurisdiction wasn't proper there, which it was. He was responsible for another child's death the year before, a girl by the name of Liliana Wright. I think she was 4 or 5 years old, and she died in a heroin-fueled torture session between a mom and a boyfriend. So you would kind of think that being responsible for a child's death would make you care more about children, but it really didn't.
That's absolutely terrible. And what's the judge's name so everybody knows?
Judge William Harris or Bill Harris
And
of the 233rd.
did he get disbarred?
No, he did a news segment with Fox 4 News here in Dallas, and he said, "I would like to know what CPS knew." But the whole time during the case, the grandmother was trying to get into the courtroom to explain to um, the judge how the child was in danger, but he didn't want to hear that, and so for him to tell Fox News that he'd like to know what CPS knew, well, he chose not to.
But is this judge still sitting on the bench?
No, he's a retired judge now. So, this is a little tangent. In Texas, retired judges can hear cases.
It's like that in
Um,
Connecticut too. They call it a trial
yeah,
judge
so
referee or something.
right. So whenever there's a case that gets really messy and it starts getting popular, famous, whatever you call it, then they normally call in a retired judge to do the dirty work that an elected judge doesn't want to do.
It's interesting because like in Connecticut, it's that they have a law that says that a judge cannot stay on the bench after the age of 70. But then there's another law that says that if they're over the age of 70 and they retire, they're allowed to be a trial judge referee, and that they're only supposed to be able to make like administrative rulings, like, fee waivers, things like that. Instead, they have these judges going and hearing cases, presiding over hearings, like doing all the regular functions of a judge as if they were the same, even though it conflicts with the law that says that they're too old. And it conflicts with the other law that says they're limited in what they're allowed to do. So, it's crazy because, like, even with legislation that's put in place to supposedly keep things controlled or keep things in check, they're still abusing it. So, I know that you have some experience with trying to work with legislators and trying to work on some proposed legislation. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, there's a little bit more case that probably needs to be told first. We can skip past the retired judges. So about 3 years or so, the child counselor and the mom, they got married about 2 weeks later after they got arrested. They knew each other less than a month. The mom's first husband, so I didn't marry the mother. The mom's first husband, he's been missing for over 10 years and they haven't found his body.
What?
Um,
Wait, was
so
that
that's a little
before
interesting.
you?
Yeah.
And he went missing and they never found his body and it's still a pending thing?
Yeah, they're still searching for his body. His parents have spent over a quarter million on private investigators and stuff,
What?
trying to find him.
Do you believe that
So,
maybe there's foul play involved?
I mean, I wouldn't rule anything out. Apparently, he also associated with a lot of rough people, and so it's just unclear. But nothing can really be ruled out at the end of the day.
So then what happened?
So then the mom's second husband, the child counselor, he called me about 3 years into their marriage and said that uh, you need to get custody immediately because your daughter is in danger. I'm in an airport, so I'm going to be moving around a little bit. Um, so he called me 3 years later, said, you need to get custody, your daughter's in danger. So I went and had a meeting with him. I said, what's going on? And he said that the mom had moved in with the next door neighbor and basically a drug dealer. So that was in late 2019, and that she moved in with him, and he'd already spent 2 years for drugs and assault. He's been arrested a total of 5 times, and then on May 4th, 2020, he was arrested for injuring both of his children. So um, at this point, I had an emergency hearing in July, and I enrolled my daughter in school, and that was her first school. She was in counseling, and told the court that my daughter was living with a man who's out on bond for injuring both of his children. And the judge said I needed to remove my daughter from school and from counseling immediately and return her the next day.
Wow.
And so the bond conditions on him say that he can't see or speak to either of his boys. So he can't see or talk to either of his boys, but a judge requires my daughter to live with him. And so then I did what was called a motion to reconsider. It's kind of like an appeal, but in the trial court, just saying, hey, I think you got this wrong. Let's take another look at this. And so we had 3 hearings on the motion to reconsider, and that took 8 months. And during those 3 hearings, the two boys that got injured, their mom showed up to testify for my daughter, and she described um, how he injured them. And then the ruling on that was that my rights were going to be reduced. So the judge took away my summers, my spring breaks, and a holiday, and reduced my weekends from 2 weekends a month to
Did they
one
give
weekend
a
a month.
reason?
No. Then they also took away two of my video calls from Tuesday and Thursday just to Thursday.
So at the end, after the judge heard everybody's side, the judge made a ruling in court.
No, he made a ruling like a week later by email.
Yeah, I noticed that they like, when because my older one, she's 10. And so when I first went to court with her, it was like 2015, 2016. And it was like you would always hear the ruling before you left court. The judge would make a ruling at the end of the hearing, and that was it. Now I've noticed since like 2021 and up that they'll do that where they'll wait, they'll go home, and then they'll issue their ruling or memorandum like a week later or days later, or in some cases, 9 months, 10 months later, I've seen.
Yeah.
And so it's crazy because it's like I've also read that the Supreme Court has stated that if a judge is making an order outside of the courtroom, it's null and void, which is another thing you could put in there.
I haven't heard that before. Is that U.S. Supreme Court or Connecticut?
I believe the US Supreme Court, I could look it up and try to send it to you, but I was just reading this that they said that an order has to be made in the courtroom in order to be valid.
So there might be some stipulations to that, whether it's a final order or a temporary order. So
But
that would
it's like
also
if they're
be
doing
another
it
thing.
outside of the courtroom, then they don't have that jurisdiction to be doing it. And also there's no judicial immunity when they're doing that. So like if they go home and work on it at home and issue it when they feel like it, then it loses the validity. And there's specific things that the Supreme Court has said so many things that the states just ignore. And so it's like up to us to hold them accountable and say, look, this is the Supreme Court. This is the supreme law of the land. You have to follow it. And these states thinks that they can just do whatever they want with no oversight.
Yeah. I mean, it's an uphill battle for sure.
So tell me about
Um,
the legislation. Tell me about your efforts to try to get
well,
some
wait,
laws changed.
there's still more too.
Okay.
So then when he made that ruling, fortunately, a couple of days later, I was able to get that reversed. Um, we just basically just politely said, "Hey, judge, we think you got it wrong. Nobody petitioned to have my rights reduced. We were petitioning to protect the child." And so then the mom's attorney uh, spoke up in court and said, if the father's willing to continue driving 500 miles, then we'll let him have his rights back. Otherwise, the mom's attorney said the order is going to stand as it's written. So at this point, the judge wasn't even the judge anymore. It was the mom's attorney who started acting as the judge in that case. So, I agreed to continue doing all the driving for the mother's move so that I could keep the rights that I had. But the same day that that order got filed, I picked my daughter up and she had injuries all over her. She had injuries to the insides of her wrist, the outsides of her ankles. She had a dime-sized burn on her right foot. She had scratch marks on her throat, um, bruises on her arms and legs, and then she had four puncture wounds on her left thigh. And when I looked at her left thigh, I knew that that was way off. Um, so I went and got a fork from the kitchen because what I done is I asked myself what has four, what has four, what has four, what has four, and then I thought, well, a fork has four. So I went and got a fork from the kitchen and it lined up perfectly. Um, so then I filed a police report for injury to a child. Um, and then that weekend, she was also diagnosed with sexual abuse confirmed by a hospital. The police came and picked up the evidence from the hospital on sexual abuse confirmed by the hospital, but they refused to send that evidence to a lab to be tested. And so the reason why they said they were refusing to send the lab evidence to the lab to be tested, they checked off a box and said because no crime had been committed. But in Texas, sexual abuse of a child is a crime. So when they don't send that evidence to the lab to be tested, at that point they're committing a crime called tampering with evidence. So that's basically my story in a nutshell. I made a documentary about it. It's 33 minutes long and it's on YouTube called Keep Avery Safe Documentary.
So keep Avery safe documentary on YouTube.
Yeah.
Okay. And let me ask you something. Do you think that the police were negligent, or do you think that they were complicit in trying to cover something up?
The police,
Yes.
yeah, yeah, they were complicit in trying to cover something up because I talked to a police investigator just a few days ago, and he said it's not standard procedure to commit a crime of tampering with evidence.
Yeah, it seems to be the theme. Everybody I talk to that has, you know, allegations of sexual abuse specifically or child abuse, it seems like there's something really, really wrong going on in the police departments and courts across the country. So I'm
Yeah,
glad that more people are speaking up and, you know, props to you for making a documentary. I think that that is awesome. And, it's really great because it's something that you can always share for years to come.
right. Like there was just so much to the case that I wasn't doing the case any justice by cutting it up into bites or clips and putting a piece out here and a piece out there. People just couldn't understand the story. Um, and so I just thought, this needs to be made a whole story. I probably could have gone on for 2 hours, but I was trying to keep it short. So I kept it down to like 33 minutes.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I know it's something I'd like to do too. It's just there's so much going on and it's a lot, but I feel like sometimes like with me I post on TikTok and some people don't understand and they'll comment asking the same questions over and over and like they just don't get it unless you sit there and watch all the videos. So I think
Yeah,
doing
I've seen
documentary is good.
I've seen some comments on yours like, take it to the police. And, how many hundreds of times do you have to answer that question? A documentary would be helpful in that situation. So you can say, I went to the police, they said this, I did this, they said that, I did this, they said that. And so then by the end of the documentary, there's like, okay, I don't have any questions. That's messed up.
Yeah, and literally I'll put like a caption on the video like the police saw this and did nothing and people will like comment, call the police, call the police, call CPS, call CPS. I'm just like nobody listens. But you're right. And also I've realized like too like being on more than one platform helps because which is partly why I wanted to start the podcast because Spotify and Audible and Apple Music, these are like platforms that reaches a different type of category of people. And I think like a lot of people on TikTok are younger generation, and then even with Facebook, with Instagram. I can't remember where I first found you. Was it TikTok or Instagram?
Probably TikTok.
Yeah. And so I mean, as far as social media, do you think that you would encourage other parents going through stuff like this to post and put it out there?
Oh, definitely. So, I would say I have two quotes that I really like that I came up with. One is that isolation is the foundation of all abuse. So, nobody can continue abusing you. Anyone who abuses you wants you to be isolated. They don't want you to make an outcry. And the second thing I'd say is that a lot of kids don't make outcries for their abuse, but parents will go into court and get abused. But then we're told by our attorney or a judge, don't make an outcry for this abuse. Don't go on social media. And so, parents don't make outcries for their own abuse in court. So why would we expect a child to make an outcry for their abuse?
Yeah, it's almost like we're conditioned, like, oh, don't post it on social media because people might think something of you. But, same thing with me. Like, this first happened in May of 2023. I didn't start posting anything until maybe, September of 2023 was when I really started posting about it. And before that, I was like embarrassed. I was ashamed. And also, you get everybody telling you not to. And, if you asked me 2 years ago and if you showed me you or me or anybody else that's been through this and told me that they were a victim of the system, that they didn't do anything wrong, that they were falsely accused or whatever injustice it was, I would never believe it. I would never believe it. In the past, I would say to myself, no, that parent must be on drugs. They must be abusive. They must have done something really, really bad. And like, no matter what the person said, I would never believe it. And that's why it's so important for people to speak up, because like I've had so many people reach out to me saying the same thing happened to them and thanking me, saying, wow, thanks for saying something, because I know I'm not alone now.
Mhm. So yeah, I definitely would recommend social media. I didn't really go onto social media and start doing this until I felt it was absolutely necessary. I saw that the patterns were just continuing and continuing and continuing, and that there was no amount of arrest for child abuse that were going to be sufficient to please the courts. Because now my daughter lives with not one, but two child abusers, according to CPS.
And it's still an ongoing battle, right? You're still dealing with it all.
Yeah, so I filed the modification in July of 2020. In Texas, you can have a jury trial, and I think it's the only state you can have a jury trial in. And so I requested a jury trial, and it's been 4 years. And every single time that gets scheduled, it just gets continued. And then as far as the mom's boyfriend's arrest, he's still pending a trial for the injury to his two children 4 years later as well.
Wow. And are you or your ex dealing with an attorney, or are you doing it by yourself?
So I had six attorneys, and I had probably one of them was decent, and he basically admitted in court that the laws weren't written very well. And then that's kind of where I got the idea for the legislation we can talk about in a second. But when my attorney said that, he's like, "Yeah, that's not written very well." I was like, "Huh, maybe something needs to be done about that." Um, but um, but the majority of my attorneys, especially five of them, they were just messing up so bad, um, and then it became a pattern. They were also basically putting me under coercion or duress, and trying to convince me to do all these horrible decisions. And I just basically realized that my attorneys weren't on my side. Um, One of them, I had filed a 221-page temporary restraining order with 60 exhibits. And before that hearing on that temporary restraining order that I had written, he went and spent 2.5 hours in judge's chambers, and then he walked out a different person. Uh, when that court hearing started, he was not the same attorney that I had spoken with before he spent 2.5 hours in judge's chambers. And then he got up in court and said that all of my evidence and all my 60 exhibits aren't enough to protect the child.
Wow. So I don't want to run out of time. I want to make sure we have time to talk about with the legislation. So can you briefly kind of say a little bit about what did you propose as a bill?
Right. So in that hearing, under Chapter 156, which is modification of custody, it says the judge can protect a child if a child would be impaired in the future. And so the problem I have with that is that when you're on the stand, you can't testify about the future because that's an objection to speculation. You're not allowed to speculate what's going to happen in the future. But in this section of the family code, a judge can protect a child if the child is going to be impaired in the future. I believe that protecting a child should be based on past or present evidence, not future evidence. Because what they said is, yes, she lives with two child abusers, the child does, but there's no evidence here today from the future that says she's going to be abused.
You know what's funny? Can I just butt in really quick? It's hilarious. I posted this hearing. It was from October 23rd, 2023. And in it, the judge, Christopher Griffin, says that I'm not allowed to bring up any past events. I'm not allowed to ask any questions to my ex about past events. He's not interested in anything about past events, only about future events.
Right. So,
The
I've
judge
been
said
trying
that.
to, that's how the law is written here too.
No, in
You know,
yours, you just said it was the opposite, right? Where if you ask about future, it's speculation, right?
right, right. It's an objection to speculation. but the law is written requiring judges to speculate. So it's what I call the crystal ball bill. And because he said the child wasn't going to be impaired in the future, but she was impaired that exact evening, his crystal ball was broken. And so, the danger with that, that wording is that, they're saying that two child abusers won't impair a child in the future, but when there's no evidence, they can say the child is going to be impaired.
But you're saying that they won't consider like testimony or evidence about things that happened prior to the court date that prompted you to file the motion?
Well, ultimately, under modification, it's saying that they have to decide whether or not the child is going to be impaired in the future.
That's how it's written in your code, in the statute?
Essentially, I could give you the exact wording, but that's essentially what it says. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think it's crazy because it just highlights that there's so many issues with the way that the legislation is written, and not just written, but um how is it interpreted and how is it actually enforced or used in real life.
Right. So then in Chapter 153 in Texas, which is the initial suit affecting the parent-child relationship, 153.004, it says a judge may not give joint managing conservatorship if there's credible evidence of child abuse or neglect. What says may not. So if you look up Black's Law Dictionary and look up the word may, it basically means may or may not.
That's what
So the
my
word
ex would say to
shall,
me. He would say, "Oh, it says you may get FaceTimes, therefore you don't get any because it's optional."
and legally,
He's right,
legally
legally.
that
Yeah.
legally he's right.
But he's being
So,
an asshole. I mean, who says that?
the average person who reads the family code and it says that a judge may not give joint managing conservatorship if there's child abuse or neglect, the average person would just read that and be like, sounds good to me.
Yeah.
But they don't know that the word shall is missing. And then later on, a couple lines down, it says it's a rebuttable presumption that child abuse and neglect is not in the best interest of the child if it's committed by that parent, any person in that parent's household, or any person who's given unsupervised access to the child, such as a babysitter. So the key words right there is it's a rebuttable presumption. So what rebuttable means is arguable. So it's arguable whether or not child abuse or neglect is in the best interest of a child. So I asked artificial intelligence to give me a list of all the reasons why child abuse is in the best interest of a child. And artificial said I couldn't come up with any. So if we can't come up with any reasons why child abuse is in the best interest of a child, then maybe we should use the word shall instead of rebuttable presumption. So then I drafted a bill, a proposed bill, making it that child abuse shall not be in the best interest of the child, and also removing the future tense from a modification case. So removing the crystal ball effect and just saying, again, past or present evidence is not in the best interest of the child. Real quick, I'd probably say one thing I like to share with people is that there's four main injustices in family court. The first and most common one is that two good parents can't have equal rights because that doesn't create enough conflict for the courts. There has to be conflict in order to create money. There has to be injustice in order to create money. So um, by not giving children equal rights with both parents when they're fit, willing, and able, that creates injustice, which creates money. The second form of injustice is that children, when they're abused, they must be abused or continue to be abused. What that does is that creates conflict or injustice, which creates money. The third form of injustice is that false allegations must be believed because then the person who hasn't done anything wrong, they're going to go hire an attorney and spend money to stay in their children's lives. So false allegations are believed in child abuse when there's, convictions of child abuse, that's not believed. And then the fourth form of injustice is that it's kind of like false allegations on steroids. And that's when CPS removes children from what's essentially fit families. could be for like a traffic violation or something small. Um, but that's kind of like a more severe example of false allegations when children remove or CPS removes children for no reason. So my bill basically it aims to do two things at once. It aims to raise the burden of proof to reduce false allegations, and it also goes to say that child abuse shall not be in the best interest of the child. So in the last legislative session in Texas, there was a bill that was passed that said if you abuse an animal, you can't own an animal for another 5 years. And there's a news article that said the reason for that is that a lot of times someone who abuses an animal will reoffend right after they get out of jail. And so I've been asking the legislators to give my daughter the same protections that dogs and cats were just recently given.
And so your
And then,
bill is going to be voted on this year?
no, my bill is merely just written by me. I'm going around meeting with senators and representatives in Texas, trying to find someone who will sponsor the bill. And, you know, do you think it would be easy to find someone to sponsor a bill that says child abuse is not in the best interest of the child? But it just hasn't been very easy so far.
Okay, well, I know we only have about a minute left, so I do want to thank you again for your time and thank you for everything that you've discussed with us today. And I'm going to make sure to share this with everybody so that we can try to get you as much support as possible for, this legislation to pass. I think it's really important to try to change the laws and recognize the things that need to get worked on. And every effort that you've made is admirable. So thanks for everything that you've done, for the people of Texas and for your own case.
Sure. And yeah, just check out Keep Avery Safe on Facebook and YouTube. I'm also on TikTok, but I'm not on there very much. Mainly Facebook and YouTube.
And what's your TikTok name?
It's Keep Avery Safe.
Keep Avery safe. Okay. Thank you so much again,
Yep.
Alan.
Yep. Thank you. Have a great day.
Okay. You too.